The candle had burned itself down to a pool of wax. The wick, sputtering like it too, was tired of fighting the dark. Still, she sat at the wooden table, her hands folded around a creased, sweat-stained letter. Her lips moved without sound at first. Then, barely above a whisper, "Please take me before the sun rises. I'll cook, clean. I won't complain." It was not the first time she had spoken those words into the stillness, and she knew it would not be the last. The little boarding-house room smelled faintly of dust and boiled potatoes. Its window cracked open to the night air. Outside, the city dozed in shadows. A horse snorted down the alley. A cart rattled over cobblestones. But none of it belonged to her. This world had no place for women like her, too plain for marriage, too poor for respect, too tired to keep bending under the weight of scorn. Her name was Clara Dawson, though she suspected no one in this town remembered it any more. They called her that spinster girl when they thought she couldn't hear. She was 23 years old, but poverty had carved fine lines around her mouth already, and loneliness had hollowed her eyes. The letter trembled in her hands as she unfolded it again. To the gentleman rancher of Wyoming Territory, I am Clara Dawson of Hartford. I can work hard. I can keep a home. I ask only for a chance. If you will have me, I will not complain. Please take me before the sun rises. Yours in earnest, Clara Dawson. The ink had blotted in places where her tears had fallen. She had written it weeks ago, sealed it, and sent it west with nothing but the last coins from selling her mother's locket. And against all sense, a reply had come. She closed her eyes and saw the simple words again, written in a strong, spare hand. Come. No name, no warmth, only that one word. But to Clara, it might as well have been a door flung wide open. She pressed the letter to her chest, whispering again, "Please take me." The stagecoach that carried her west was cramped and smelled of sweat and horsehide. Clara sat squeezed between a traveling preacher who snored and a widow with two unruly children who cried until their throats were raw. Each jolt of the wheels over rutted earth made her stomach churn, but she held her small carpet-bag close and kept her eyes on the horizon. The world grew wilder with every mile. Neat brick buildings gave way to clapboard towns, then to long stretches of open prairie where grass bowed like waves in a sea of green and gold. Sometimes at dawn, the light spilled across the land in such a way that it made Clara catch her breath like God himself had laid his hand there, but beauty did little to soothe fear. At night, when the coach stopped at roadside inns, she lay awake listening to the laughter of men drinking in the saloons and the creak of boots on wooden porches. She felt eyes linger too long when she stepped down to stretch her legs. They knew somehow what she was. A woman alone on the road was an invitation to judgment. A mail-order bride was an invitation to ridicule. One evening, as the sky burned red with the last of the sun, the driver reined in the horses sharply. The wheels groaned to a stop. Clara clutched the seat as whispers of alarm passed through the passengers. "Road agents," the preacher muttered, his voice thick with dread. Clara's blood turned to ice. Out of the tall grass rode three men, dust rising behind them, pistols glinting. Their bandanas masked their faces, but their eyes burned sharp and cruel. The tallest of the bandits rode straight up to the coach window and leaned down, his revolver tapping lightly against the wooden frame. "Evenin'," he drawled. "Reckon you'll best be handin' over your purses if you fancy seeing the sunrise," the widow whimpered, clutching her children. The preacher fumbled out a leather pouch. Clara's hands shook as she pulled out her last few coins, all she had left for the journey. She had hidden her carpet-bag beneath her skirts, praying they wouldn't notice. It held nothing of value to anyone but her an extra dress, a cracked comb, and the letter that bound her fate. The bandit's gaze flicked to Clara, lingering. "Well, what's this then?" he said, tilting his head. "A lady traveling alone?" Her breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, but no words. Kane got the driver spat over the side. "She's bound for a husband out west. Ain't none of your concern?" The man laughed, sharp and mean. "A mail-order bride? Mercy, some poor fool waiting on her, is he? Hope he likes his meat lean." His companions chuckled. Heat flared. In Clara's cheeks, shame burning hotter than fear. She wanted to vanish into the seat, to become nothing at all. Finally, with a smirk, the bandit tucked her few coins into his pocket, tipped his hat mockingly, and signaled the others. "Let's go, boys. Nothing worth shooting here." They wheeled their horses and rode off, dust swallowing them. When the coach lurched forward again, Clara's hands were cold and damp, her heart slamming in her chest. She stared at the horizon through blurred eyes. For the first time, doubt gnawed at her resolve. What am I doing? What kind of life am I racing toward? But the letter was still in her bag, its one word burning in her mind. Days later, the coach rattled into the frontier town of Dry Creek, just as the sun dipped behind jagged mountains. The town was a scatter of wooden buildings, smoke curling. From chimneys, the air thick with the smell of horses and coal oil. Men lounged outside the saloon, their laughter sharp as broken glass. A dog barked. A piano played something ragged and fast. Clara stepped down, clutching her bag so tight her knuckles whitened. Dust coated her boots, her dress clung to her with sweat. Every gaze seemed to find her. "There she is," someone muttered. "Another mail-order girl. Won't last a month," another voice snickered. Clara lowered her head, heat flooding her face. She wanted to run, but her legs were heavy. Then, from the edge of the street, a man stepped forward. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing most of his face. Dust streaked his coat, and his boots were warm from years of hard miles. He moved with a slow, deliberate weight, like a man who had nothing left to prove. Her breath caught. "Is it him?" The stagecoach driver tipped his hat. "Mr. McGraw," he said simply. So that was his name. Clara swallowed hard, her mouth dry. The man missed her. McGraw looked at her, and for a moment his eyes, pale and gray, seemed to cut straight through her. He said nothing. Clara's heart pounded. This was it. Everything she was. Every prayer she'd whispered into the night. Every humiliation she had endured. It had all led her here. She clutched her bag, stepped forward, and forced her trembling voice to steady. "Please take me before the sun rises," she said, just as she had whispered so many nights. "I'll cook, clean, I won't complain." The words fell between them, raw and desperate. For the first time, something flickered. In his eyes, something she couldn't name. And in that silence, as the town watched, Clara Dawson's new life began. The town kept watching, as if Clara were a curiosity displayed in a carnival tent. The silence stretched between her and the man called McGraw, thick as the dust swirling around their boots. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even tip his hat, just stared, gray eyes unreadable. Finally, with the slow certainty of a man used to being obeyed, he reached down, took her carpetbag from her hands, and said in a voice rough as gravel, "This way." No greeting, no welcome. Just a command. Clara followed, her heart rattling inside her chest. Behind them, the laughter of the saloon rose louder, sharper. "Won't last a week. Bet he'll send her back on the next stage. McGraw's. Curse strikes again." The words knifed into her back as surely as if they'd been spoken to her face. She didn't dare turn. His wagon was tied up outside the general store. The boards creaked as Clara climbed in, her skirts catching on the splintered edge. McGraw tossed her bag beside her, climbed up, and snapped the reins. The horses jolted forward. For a long while, there was only the rhythm of hooves and the jangle of harness. Clara sat stiff, staring at her hands in her lap. She wanted to speak anything to break the silence, but the weight of him beside her pressed her voice down. At last, she ventured softly, "Thank you for sending for me." He said nothing. She bit her lip. "I can cook, and I know how to mend clothes. I'm a quick learner. I promise I won't be a burden." Still nothing. Only the creak of the wagon and the endless sweep of prairie rolling out before them. Finally, when she thought he might never speak, his voice came low and flat. "This ain't about promises." Clara blinked at him, unsure. "I don't understand." He kept his eyes on the road. "You're here because I need it. Help. The ranch won't run itself. You work, you eat. You don't, then you don't." The bluntness stung. She turned her face to the horizon, swallowing hard against the lump rising in her throat. The McGraw Ranch sat several miles outside town, a sprawl of open land hemmed by low hills. Fences stretched into the distance, some broken, some sagging. A weathered barn leaned slightly to one side, and the house, a squat, two-story frame with peeling paint, looked like it had been standing since the land was first claimed. It was lonely, so terribly lonely. He helped her down from the wagon, set her bag on the porch, and pushed open the door. Inside smelled of dust, smoke, and old wood. The furniture was plain, scarred from years of use. A fire smoldered in the hearth, but the room still felt cold. McGraw set his hat on a peg, then turned to her. "Kitchen's there. Water pump out back. Chores start before dawn." Clara nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Something flickered in his eyes at the "sir," but he said nothing more. Instead, he climbed the stairs and vanished into the shadows. Above, leaving her standing alone with the hollow creak of the floorboards. That night, Clara lay awake on a narrow bed in the upstairs guest room. Moonlight filtered through the window, painting silver bars across the floor. She listened to the silence of the house. No laughter, no warmth, only the sound of the wind pressing against the walls, and the occasional shift of footsteps in the room down the hall. His room. She thought of the whispers in town. McGraw's curse. What did they mean? Turning onto her side, she clutched her pillow and whispered again into the dark, "Please let me belong here. Please." The days that followed tested every promise she had made to herself. The work was endless. Dawn to dusk, her hands were never still scrubbing, hauling, mending, cooking. Her palms blistered from the washboard. Her arms ached from pumping water. She burned the first batch of bread, undercooked the second. McGraw said nothing, only pushed the food aside without a word. When she stumbled over a bucket and spilled water across the floor, heat surged in her cheeks, Shane threatening to swallow her whole. "I'm sorry," she whispered, hurrying to clean it. But he only watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't kindness either. It was indifference. And that somehow hurt more. Third day, while mending a torn shirt, Clara worked up the courage to ask Mr. McGraw. The townsfolk, they said things about a curse. He froze, his hand hovering over the chair where he'd been about to sit. Slowly, his eyes lifted to hers, as she almost wished she hadn't spoken. "My wife," he said flatly. "She died 2 winters back. Fever took her quick." Clara's needle trembled in her fingers. I'm so sorry." He gave a small shrug, as if brushing the memory aside. But his eyes darkened, storm clouds rolling behind gray. Since then, 3 women came to this house. Hired help, none lasted. Too lonely, too hard, too much me. His mouth twisted, almost bitter. Town calls it a curse. I call it truth. Clara's throat tightened. 3 before her, and she was the 4th. He leaned back in the chair at last, eyes on the fire. If you're looking for sweet words or a gentle hand, you came to the wrong place. Her chest ached, but she lifted her chin, steadying her voice. I didn't come for sweet words, Mr. McGraw. I came for a life. For the first time, something flickered in his expression, a shadow of surprise, maybe even respect. But it was gone in an instant. A week later, Clara made her first trip to town with him. The general store was crowded, the air heavy with sawdust and spice. As they stepped inside, heads turned. McGraw's got himself another. Someone muttered, "Poor girl, won't last till winter." Clara's face burned. She pretended not to hear, but every word clung to her like BURRS at the counter. McGraw ordered supplies in his flat, steady tone. Clara, desperate to prove herself, asked the shopkeeper for flour, lard, and a bolt of cloth to patch his shirts. The man raised his brows. "Already settling in, miss?" Before she could answer, a shrill laugh rose from the back of the store. 2 women, faces powdered and lips red as berries, leaned together, eyes glittering. "That's her?" one whispered loudly. "The new bride?" "God help her," the other snorted. Clara's stomach knotted, humiliation burning her from the inside out. But when she glanced at McGraw, expecting him to ignore it, she saw his jaw tighten. He set his money on the counter with deliberate force. "Let's go," he said curtly, gathering the sacks. On the way out, the women's laughter followed them like knives. Clara walked faster, head down, but McGraw's long stride caught hers at the wagon. He paused, setting the supplies in the back. Then, quietly, without looking at her, he muttered, "Pay no mind to M." The words were gruff, almost careless, but to Clara, they landed like a shield. Small, rough-edged, but a shield all the same. That night, as she kneaded bread with sore hands, Clara thought of that flicker of protection. Maybe, beneath the silence and the stone, there was more to this man than the world saw. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than desperation. But outside, on the hills, the coyotes cried. And in the saloon back in town, voices laughed late into the night. Whispers carried on the wind. She won't last. Clara straightened her back, wiped flour from her hands, and whispered to the empty kitchen, "We'll see." The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of ranch life beat like a drum. Sunrise, work, sunset, exhaustion. For Clara, it was trial by fire. She woke in the cold dark before dawn, her breath fogging the air, hands stiff with chill as she pumped water from the stubborn well. She learned to stoke the fire until the hearth roared, to coax bread from flour and lard into something edible, to patch trousers until her fingertips bled from the needle dot. It wasn't graceful. Her bread was often too hard, her stitches uneven. The first time she tried milking a cow, the animal kicked over the pail and nearly flattened her against the stall wall. McGraw had stood there, arms crossed, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. When Clara shot him a glare, he had turned on his heel and walked away. But that smirk haunted her. It wasn't cruel. It was something closer to amusement, maybe even admiration. And she found herself replaying it at night when she lay in bed, listening to the wind whistle across the prairie. The loneliness of the land was immense. Days passed, without another human voice but McGraw's, and his words were few. She tried to fill the silence with humming, with talking to the chickens, even with the occasional clumsy joke tossed his way. Sometimes his mouth twitched, as if fighting back a laugh. That small crack in his stone face gave her courage to keep trying. But beneath the small victories, danger was brewing. Rumors reached them from town bandits prowling, cattle going missing. From ranches farther south, men spoke of strangers seen at night, fires on the ridgelines. The law in Dry Creek was thin. The sheriff, more fond of whiskey than his badge. Clara tried to push the whispers from her mind, but unease stalked her like a shadow. One evening, as the sun melted into a crimson horizon, Clara stood by the corral, watching the cattle shift restlessly. The air was too still, too sharp. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. McGraw came up behind her, his gaze scanning the ridges. His hand rested on the butt of the revolver at his hip. "Something's wrong," he muttered. The words chilled her. Moments later, shadows moved on the hill. 3 riders, then 4, then more, sliding down the slope like wolves closing on prey. Clara's stomach dropped. Bandits. McGraw's voice was steel. Inside, now. But Clara froze, rooted by the sight of those men, faces masked, guns glinting. She had seen them once before on the stagecoach road. "Go!" McGraw barked, shoving her toward the house. She stumbled inside, heart hammering, fumbling for the lantern. Through the window, she saw McGraw stride into the yard, rifle raised. His silhouette stood tall and unyielding against the fire-red sky. Shots cracked. The cattle bawled in terror, hooves thundering. Clara's breath came fast, ragged. Without thinking, she seized the lantern, threw open the door, and ran into the door. "Yard! Clara!" McGraw's voice cut sharp through the chaos. But she didn't stop. She hurled the lantern at the ground near the corral fence. Flames leapt high, the sudden blaze spooking the cattle into a frenzy. They surged forward, hooves churning dust, horns flashing. The bandits' horses reared, riders swearing as they fought for control. The confusion bought McGraw precious seconds. His rifle barked once. Twice 2 men fell. The others scattered, cursing, shots sparking harmless against the barn's walls. Ducked behind the water trough, her hands shaking violently. Smoke stung her eyes, the fire crackling, cattle bawling. She thought she might be sick. Then dash silence. When the dust settled, only 2 bodies lay on the ground, their horses long gone. With the rest, a cattle pressed against the far fence, still snorting and stamping. But the danger had passed for now. McGraw lowered his rifle, his chest heaving. Slowly, his gaze found Clara. Her skirts were smudged with dirt, her hair falling loose, her face streaked with soot. But her eyes blazed with a fierce light, the lantern's flames still dancing in their reflection. For the first time, she saw him truly look at her. Not as a burden, not as a desperate girl, but as something else. "You could have gotten yourself killed," he said, his voice low, tight. She swallowed hard, forcing her trembling body to still. "So could you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire popped, sending sparks into the dark. Then, to her astonishment, the corner of his mouth twitched again. Not quite a smile, something rarer, more fragile. "You've got more fight in you than I thought," he said, the words wrapped around her like a cloak against the cold. That night, after the dead men had been buried in shallow graves beyond the ridge, Clara sat by the hearth, hands still shaking. McGraw sat across from her, silent as ever, but his eyes lingered on her more than once. She broke the silence first, her voice unsteady. "When I came here, I thought all I had to offer was work, scrubbing floors, baking bread. But tonight—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. McGraw leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The firelight carved deep shadows across his face. "Work keeps a roof overhead," he said. "But grit keeps you alive out here." Clara met his eyes. For once they didn't look like cold stone. They looked like storm clouds parting, if only for a breath of sunlight. And in that moment, something shifted between them. But the reprieve was thin as paper. The next morning, Clara woke to find McGraw already saddled, rifle across his back. "Where are you going?" she asked, clutching her shawl tight against the dawn chill. "Town," he said. "Bandits won't take kindly to last night. Need to warn the sheriff." She hesitated. "Will you be back?" His gaze lingered on her a moment longer than usual. "I always come back," he said. Then he rode off, dust trailing behind him. Clara stood on the porch, heart twisting. She realized then how much she wanted him to return, not just because she needed him, but because she was beginning to care. The prairie stretched endless before her, silent, waiting, and she whispered again, but this time not in desperation, "Please, come back before the sun sets." That evening, when his horse finally appeared on the ridge, something inside Clara eased. She ran to meet him, skirts flying, relief flooding her. McGraw dismounted, and for once he didn't pull back when her eyes met his. Instead, in the quiet between them, with the firelight of dusk painting the sky, she realized this ranch no longer felt like a prison. It was beginning to feel like home. The bandits had not forgotten. For days, the ranch seemed wrapped in silence, too sharp to be natural. The cattle shifted nervously, lowing at night. Coyotes howled more often, closer to the fence lines, and McGraw grew restless. His gray eyes scanned the ridges, his rifle never far from reach. Clara felt it too, the weight of waiting. She worked harder, faster, as though scrubbing floors or kneading bread might push the danger away. But when dusk fell and shadows lengthened, her chest tightened with dread. McGraw said little. Yet his glances toward her were more frequent now, less like a man tolerating company and more like a man who cared. He had begun taking her opinions on small matters, where to store the feed, which calf to wean. It was subtle, but to Clara it meant everything. And then came the night the bandits returned. It was near midnight, the moon a pale coin above. Clara lay awake, listening to the steady creak of the windmill, when she heard it. Horses. Many of them. She bolted upright, heart hammering. The sound grew louder, hooves pounding earth. Then a sharp whistle split the night, followed by shouts. "McGraw!" A voice bellowed from the dark. "We've come to finish what you started." Clara's. Blood ran cold. Doors slammed open. McGraw was already in the yard, rifle in hand, his silhouette cut against the silver moonlight. Clara rushed out after him, gripping a lantern. Shapes poured from the shadows, half a dozen riders, maybe more, guns flashing in the pale light. McGraw raised his rifle. A night exploded. The battle was chaos. Bullets screamed through the air, splintering the fence, shattering a water trough. Horses shrieked, cattle stampeded against the far corral. Fire from Clara's lantern cast wild shadows across the yard. McGraw moved with grim precision, each shot placed with deadly calm. 2 men fell, their cries swallowed by the dark. But there were too many. A bandit broke from the group, charging straight at Clara. She stumbled back, her lantern swinging. He grabbed for her arm, snarling, but before terror could steal her breath, McGraw's voice thundered. "Leave her!" The bandit froze an instant too long. McGraw's rifle barked, and the man dropped lifeless. Clara's knees buckled. The lantern slipped from her hand and shattered, flames licking up dry straw. Smoke billowed, fire spreading fast toward the barn. "Clara!" McGraw grabbed her hand, pulling her clear. His grip was fierce, grounding her in the storm. They fought side by side. After that, he firing, she fetching water to beat back the flames, her dress singed, her hands blistered. At one point, when a rider tried to circle toward the cattle, Clara seized a shovel and swung with desperate strength, knocking him clean from his saddle. The crack of bone echoed in the night. By the time the last shots faded, only 3 men remained. They fled, spurring their horses hard, vanishing into the prairie. The others lay still in the dust, The barn smoldered, but it still stood. The cattle were shaken, but alive. Dot and Clara, trembling and smoke-streaked, stood shoulder to shoulder with McGraw, both of them breathing hard in the sudden silence. The dawn came slow, pale gold spilling across the horizon. The ranch smelled of smoke and blood. Clara sat on the porch steps, cradling her burned hands. She was exhausted, her body aching, her hair tangled with ash. Dot, but for the first time since leaving Hartford, she felt strong. McGraw sat beside her, his hat in his hands. For a long time he said nothing. Then quietly, "You saved this place." Clara shook her head. We both did. His eyes, gray and weary, turned toward her. "You could have left. After the first raid. After the whispers in town. But you didn't." Her throat tightened. "Because I have nowhere else." He frowned. "No, that ain't it. You stayed because you're stronger than most men I've ever known." The words broke something inside her. Not in pain, but in release. She blinked hard, tears threatening. "When I came here, I begged to be taken before the sun rose. I thought I had nothing to offer but obedience. But now—" She looked out at the light climbing over the hills. "Now I know I can fight. I can endure. I belong." McGraw was silent for a moment. Then he reached, rough hand covering hers. His thumb brushed the bandages gently, careful not to hurt her. "You're not a bargain, Clara. You're the best damn thing that's happened to this ranch since the day it was built." Her breath caught. His words were halting, raw, but truer than anything she had ever heard. When she met his gaze, she saw no coldness there. Only a man scarred by loss, but slowly finding his way back to the living. And she smiled. A full, radiant smile that rose with the dawn. The weeks that followed sealed their bond. The town, once mocking, now whispered different words when Clara rode in for supplies. They spoke of the night the bandits were driven off, of McGraw's bride who stood her ground with fire in her eyes. The women who had laughed before now watched her with quiet respect. Clara no longer walked with her head down. She stood tall, her hands still rough, her skirts plain, but her spirit unbroken. One morning, as she hung laundry in the yard, McGraw came to her. No words, no speech. He simply took her hand, lifted it to his lips, and pressed a kiss against her scarred knuckles. It was more than any vow. It was a promise. On a clear morning not long after, the ranch stirred with unusual life. Neighbors gathered. A preacher arrived, and Clara Dawson, once forgotten and ridiculed, stood beneath the wide sky with John McGraw at her side. The preacher's words blurred in her ears. All she heard was the steady beat of her heart and the warmth of McGraw's hand around hers when he said, "I do." It was not in the flat tone he gave to daily tasks. It was firm, certain, alive. And when it was her turn, Clara did not whisper this time. Her voice rang out, strong as the prairie wind. "I do." Cheers rose, the cattle lowed, the sun climbed higher. And Clara Dawson, once desperate enough to beg before the sun rose, now stood as a wife, partner, an equal. She once thought her worth was in silence, in obedience, in begging for a place at someone's table. But the West taught her different. It taught her that grit, courage, and love could turn even the most forgotten soul into a force no curse could break. Once she whispered, "Please take me before the sun rises." Now she rises with the sun strong, unyielding, unafraid. This story moved you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because somewhere in every heart there's a Clara waiting for her gone.